Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. We're in week 10. It's March and that means that spring has finally arrived. Now we've got a new set of stitches to use in our work this month, and so that gives us more scope to use purely embroidery. So that's what I'm going to do this week. So if you want to stitch along with me, you're only going to need threads and your panel that you're going to stitch onto. So if you grab your bits and pieces, let's get stitching. Okay, so my starting point as usual was to have a think about what yellow suggests to me, and as you can see I really struggled with this one. Yellow isn't a colour that I use very often. I do associate it with happiness, so I started by thinking about the emotions that are attached to yellow, and it is quite a joyful colour. It's quite sunny and bright, so I had to think about those. Then I thought about food that I associate with the colour yellow, and again I was struggling a little bit. The biggest area of inspiration came from flowers, and although it's not particularly right for the time of year, there is quite a lot of associations of yellow roses. But most of the flowers that I came up with are early spring flowers, so we've got things like daffodils and tulips. Forsythia comes out at this time of year, and I've still got some jasmine in my garden that's been flowering all through the winter. So I thought we'd go down a floral route. So again, I came up with some ideas based around florals, and the first idea I came up with was a very simple spray of daisies and maybe some forsythia and daffodils just sweeping across. I was trying to think about how we could use our March stitches, so our looped stitches like chain stitch and fly stitch and things like that. So I thought this could work, but it's quite simple, and that diagonal sweep was a little bit too similar to the birds that we did a couple of weeks ago. So my next idea was based around forsythia, and I thought we could use our stem stitch from January to put some branches in, and then add lots of forsythia flowers all across those branches, and the dark centres we could maybe create with some beads. Again, it didn't offer enough variety for my liking, so then I thought about doing something really bold, and actually daffodils are one of my favourite flowers, and so I wanted to go with daffodils really. And I thought we could use our new stitches, so our blanket stitch and chain stitch and fly stitch, in quite creative ways here to create a spray of daffodils. And I thought about making them point in different directions just so that we can play with the stitches more. So this is the one that I'm going to go with. As I was saying, I don't use a lot of yellow, so I've dragged out all of my yellow resources. I've got a selection of different tones of yellow thread, so we've got very pale yellows. This is quite an acid yellow. I've got some pearl cotton in quite a bright sunshiny yellow, and I've got some yellows that are a lot warmer, so these are moving towards orangey yellows. Then I had a route about for some variegated threads because I thought we could have a play with those as well. And just off screen, just in the corner there, I've got a bit of green because we're going to need something for stems, so I might have a little bit of rogue green coming in there as well. I'm going to work today on this bright yellow felt, and this is the yellow that is in our Summer Brights pack. It's available on our website. I'll put the address of our website on the bottom if you want to get hold of some felt for this section. So I thought we could start by sketching out where we want our daffodils to be. So I'm going to start by putting in some circles, just placing them. My pen's running out, so it's been a bit temperamental. And I don't want one dead centre, so I'm going to go a little bit off centre with my next one. And then I'm just going to go a little bit lower. I don't want these two to line up, so I'm going to go a little bit lower with this one and pop it there. Now I don't want all my daffodils to be facing forward, so I think I'm going to do this one facing forward. So I'm just going to mark in roughly where I want the trumpet of that daffodil to be, like that, and I'm going to mark in where my petals should be. Now daffodils are 5-petal flowers. They tend to only have 5 petals unless you get those double ones that have got 10 petals. So that's going to be my first one. Now this one I want to be facing up, so I'm going to put in a little sort of segment there, and that's going to be my trumpet, and one of my petals is going to be behind the flower. So now I'm going to mark in 4 petals on this one, because the 5th one would be facing away from us, we wouldn't be able to see it. So that's my next one, and this one I think I'm going to have the trumpet off centre. So rather than it just being side on, I'll have the trumpet sort of like that, and then we're going to have, we can get all 5 petals in, I think, here, like that, just so that there's a little bit of a sense of these growing in an organic sort of way. Okay, so we might do some other bits and pieces in the background, but that's just my basic positioning. So I think I'm going to start with this one here that's facing us, and we're going to have a bit of a play with some variegated thread, and I'm going to separate out 3 strands. So I want it a little bit chunkier than I would normally use. So I'm going to start at the centre of my petal. I'm going to work this petal here, and I'm going to start off by making a smallish chain stitch. So if you're not sure about chain stitch and fly stitch, you can find them in our March stitch tutorial. I'll put a card at the top of the screen so that you can go straight there. So I'm going to create a small chain stitch in the centre of my petal, and I'm going to fill that with just a straight stitch. So that's the beginnings of my petal. Now I'm going to work some stitches around this chain, and so rather than always starting at the centre, I'm going to start just on the outside edge of the stitch that I've done, and so gradually these chain stitches are going to turn into fly stitches, because they're not going to meet at the point there. They're going to open out and turn from little sort of petal shapes into V shapes or Y shapes. So I'm just going to come up just the other side of that petal, that first chain, and go down the other side. So at the moment it's still pretty much a chain stitch. That's probably the last one I'm going to get. And put my anchor stitch in. I'm keeping my anchor stitches very short at the moment. So now I'm going to come up on the outside edge, and we're going to definitely be separate now. So this is a fly stitch now. So I've got my 2 stitches there in and out to make the loop, and my needle comes up through the loop, and I'm going to pull it just enough so that it sits around the chain stitches that I've already done. And let's do another one of those. And one more. So you can see I'm using my thumb here just to keep the thread where I want it to sit, so that it doesn't bunch up and pull over the top of the stitches that I've already made. And I'm putting the flat of my thumb on top so that they all sit nicely. Now this is my last one on this petal, so I'm going to create a little bit of a point to the petal. I'm going to make my anchor stitch just that little bit longer to make it into more of a petal shape. Probably made that slightly too long, but never mind. Right, I'm going to finish off my thread there just so that I don't have lots of trails of thread over the back, because the danger of that is that you pull too tight and it distorts your panel. So knotting my thread, and now I'm going to work my way around and make my next petal. That's my second petal. So I'm going to add in the rest of these petals, and then we'll look at how we make the trumpet in the centre of our daffodil. Okay, so here are my petals so far. So you can see the way that the variegation has created some sort of shading on those petals, and you can almost see, you can see where the chain, the anchor stitches sort of pull that shape and create quite a nice effect in the middle there. So what we're going to do now is create our trumpet on this daffodil, and we're going to do that by creating a blanket stitch wheel. So again, if you're not sure about blanket stitch wheel, it's all in that March tutorial. So I'm going to start on the outside edge of my circle. I'm going to go back in at the centre, and I'm going to work these stitches quite close together. So I'm going to come back out on the outside edge through the loop and pull. And I'm going to work my way around my circle, keeping those stitches evenly spaced but quite close together. If you didn't want to do this, you could put a button in the centre as your trumpet. You could put a really teeny tiny Suffolk puff if you have the dexterity to make one that small. You could fill it with lots of beads. There's lots of different things that you could do. So that's the centre of my daffodil. So what I'm going to try, we can give it a go and see if it works, is I'm going to try whipping that blanket stitch wheel. So again, I've got 3 strands here. I'm going to come up somewhere safe, so just in between a petal, and I'm definitely going to use the eye end of my needle, and I'm just going to whip through those horizontals. I'm hoping that this is going to make my trumpet stand a bit prouder. Now there's lots of different ways that you could stitch this, and if you've got a wider repertoire of stitches, by all means just do whatever you like. But what I'm trying really hard to do is only use techniques that we've already learnt so far in the project. So if you started at the beginning as a first time stitcher, I'm not suddenly doing anything that we haven't already learnt to do. So I'm trying not to leave anyone behind. So now I'm back to the start, and I can just take my thread back through, and there we go, that's my first daffodil. So I'm going to stitch the other daffodils in exactly the same way, and then I'll come back when I've done that and show you what I'm going to do with the rest of the space. So I thought it would be worth just showing you how to do this sort of half side on trumpet here. and I'm going to work it in blanket stitch, but I'm going to start off by putting a straight stitch in because I don't want an open end. So I've got a straight stitch there. Not easy to see, yellow on yellow, but hopefully there's enough difference that you can see. Now I've brought my needle up right at the end of that straight stitch, and I'm going to work my blanket stitch in the usual way. So I'm coming in back down here, I'm following this line here, and I'm following this line here, so they're going to sort of fan out a little bit. So I've come back in right down by the petals, and I'm keeping my stitches close together, and I've come up there through the loop and pull. So I'm sort of at the bottom, the verticals of the stitches are going to be closer together than at the top, and it's going to create a sort of fluted trumpet shape. So I'm going to whip the edge with a very bright yellow. So finally, for this trumpet here, we're going to combine a sort of blanket stitch wheel and the process that we just did here. So I'm going to start by doing the side of the trumpet, and again I'm starting with my straight stitch, and I'm going to bring my needle back up at the start of that straight stitch and work my blanket stitches. This time, instead of going round in a sort of convex curve, I'm going to go concave. So I'm curving down towards the petals rather than out. I'm not going to work my blanket stitch wheel in a circle, we're going to go in a sort of oval, so my stitches aren't all going to be the same length. So what I'm going to do is work to the other side of my horizontal, so I'll try and demonstrate so that you can see. So again, I'm working into the centre, but I'm coming up on the inside of those blanket stitches that I've just made to make the side of the trumpet, and that way my blanket stitch wheel is going to overlap. And as I go round, the stitches at the sides are going to be shorter than across the width of the wheel. So this is not a circular wheel, I'm making it into an oval. So my stitches are lengthening again now because I'm getting to those outside edges. And then they're going to shorten again. Didn't pull that one quite tight enough. So they're shortened again at the side, and then they'll lengthen again as I come back down to this end. And the last stitch. And anchor it. So there we've got our trumpet pointing up and slightly towards us. So again, I'm going to whip the outside of that blanket stitch wheel. So there are my 3 daffodils. What I'm going to do now is add some stems. So I've got my rogue green thread here. What I'm hoping is that adding in these stems in green is going to make the daffodils stand out even more. So this is just pearl cotton. And what I'm going to do is chain stitch that is worked quite close together. So I'm trying to use our stitches for this month. And daffodils obviously have a sort of neck to them, they have a bend. So I'm going to work a few stitches going in one direction, and then I'm going to sort of bend round to create that daffodil stem. So now I'm sort of cheating using a bit of green, but it's going to make the yellow or the pop all the more, I think. So that's how I'm going to work the stems. And what you can do is, in your green, make a really long chain stitch, or fly stitch rather, but very long and very shallow. Sorry, very long and very narrow is what I was after. And this will make some sort of daffodil leaves, and I'm just going to put a straight stitch down the middle of that. So I've made my stalk quite long on that, and if I put a straight stitch down the middle, so I can put a film stitch in there just to make a daffodil leaf. So I'm going to add in the rest of the stems. Okay, so here's our finished piece. We've got our daffodils, and I've just put in some little lines of feather stitch in the background just to make it look a little bit more decorative. So we've used chain stitch, fly stitch, and a combination of those, and then we've done some blanket stitch wheels and blanket stitch that we've whipped as well to create our daffodils. So I hope you enjoyed that. Just pure embroidery, no applique, no buttons, no beads, just needle and thread. I'm quite happy with the way that's turned out. It could be neater in places, but we are winging it, so sometimes it's not perfect. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. Happy crafting. Really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. If you use hashtag FSH winging it and hashtag FSH winging it 10, we'll all be able to see each other's work, and do like and comment on pieces that you see, because everyone needs a bit of encouragement. So I will see you next week. Happy stitching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.